In this video, I will cover the first topic of my PhD dissertation, a unified framework for photonic time stretch systems. Photonic time stretch is a hardware technique for ultra-fast and single-shot data acquisition. It was originally proposed in 1998 in Jalali-Lab at UCLA to overcome the speed and resolution limitation of analog to digital converters. In the ensuing 25 years, it has emerged as the most successful approach to real-time measurements and has mutated into many variants for diverse applications. For example, it has enabled the discovery of rare events such as optical rock waves and the birth of laser mode locking. Moreover, it has been applied in imaging to overcome the throughput limitation of conventional optical approaches by performing real-time image recording at megahertz frame rate, which leads to ultra-high-speed microscopy, quantitative phase imaging, and flow cytometry. The intuition of photonic time stretch is slowing down the signal using spectral modulation and optical dispersion. In a dispersive element, different frequency components travel with different speeds because of group velocity dispersion. If we can modulate the ultra-fast signal onto the spectrum of a pulse and feed it into an optical dispersive element, we can get a slowed down version of the original signal with a larger time aperture. When the dispersion is large enough, it separates different frequency components in time and leads to frequency to time mapping. In this way, we can use a single pixel photodetector to capture the spectrum in time domain at a scan rate that is significantly higher than conventional spectrometers. This lays the foundation of photonic time stretch. On the right shows the experimental data from the original paper that proposed time stretch. As we can see, the longer the propagation length, the more the original signal is slowed down. My contribution to photonic time stretch involves developing a unified framework for systems in different modalities. The framework consists of 4 steps. First, carrier stretch. In this step, a transform limited pulse, E1, from the laser source goes through the first dispersive element and gets broadened with a time aperture delta T1. The second step is information modulation. The information S is modulated onto the spectrum of E2. The incoming information may reside in different domains, such as radio frequency signals in temporal domain or line scan images in spatial domain. So the modulation is also done by different approaches, such as temporal modulation by an electro-optic modulator or spatial modulation through diffraction grating pairs. In most time stretch systems, the information is directly encoded onto the spectral amplitude. However, the spectral phase can also be modulated and detected in a coherent setup with interferometry. The third step is information stretch. Here, the modulated pulse E3 is stretched and slowed down by the second dispersive element. Now it becomes E4. Given the frequency to time mapping, we can read out the spectrum in the time domain by a high-speed photodetector. The last step is analog to digital conversion. The slowed down signal is digitized by an ADC for storage and further processing. When the information is digitized, it has a time aperture delta T2. The ratio delta T2 over delta T1 quantifies how much the incoming information is slowed down, and we define it as the stretch factor as shown here. It is determined by the ratio of the 2 dispersions in the system. Here I would like to dive into one application, which is the single-shot absorption spectroscopy enabled by the coherent setup of photonic time stretch, as it directly relates to the motivation and inspiration of developing algorithms later. In the single-shot absorption spectroscopy, the femtosecond laser pulse is injected into the target chemical as the modulation. We can then observe the absorption spectrum in single shot by utilizing the time stretch technique. This is useful for real-time monitoring of chemical dynamics over very short timescales, for example, in the study of combustion. In this 2014 paper from our lab, the absorption line of acetylene gas was measured via different approaches. The figure here shows the absorption power spectrum measured by an optical spectrum analyzer in a time-averaged manner. You can see these narrow absorption lines This is relatively clean to observe, but such measurement cannot be performed in real time. Now, the green line represents the absorption power spectrum measured in single shot. This measurement can be done in real time using a time stretch, but it is very noisy. Recall that in the coherent setup of photonic time stretch, both phase and intensity can be measured via an interferometer with coherent detection. Here, the red line represents the single-shot phase measurement from the coherent time stretch. It is clearly less noisy, even this is done in single shot in real time. Another advantage of using phase detection is the dynamic range enhancement. According to a theoretical calculation, the even-numbered absorption lines of the acetylene gas are approximately 3 times stronger than the odd-numbered lines. The figure on the left is the absorption strength of the acetylene gas from the Hytron database, which is calculated with high resolution and precision. We can observe a significant difference between odd and even number lines. However, if we look at the absorption power spectrum measured in the experiment in the middle, the difference between odd and even lines is not reflected in both time average and single-shot measurements because of spectral resolution and noise. Then, if we look at the phase measurements from the experiment on the right, it records a much larger difference between odd and even number lines, which is more consistent with theoretical results. Therefore, the phase measurement can be indicative of activities beyond the dynamic range of power measurements. To summarize, in the single-shot absorption spectroscopy, phase is measured via coherent detection, and we have observed 2 advantages of phase measurements: higher signal-to-noise ratio and better dynamic range. These observations provide the seed insight into developing physics-inspired computer vision algorithms as I will describe in the next part. This leads to the end of this video. In the next video, I will cover the second part of my dissertation, which is Phi-CV, physics-inspired computer vision. Thank you.